Welcome to the Retirement Made Easy podcast, a show created to be your go-to source for straightforward retirement advice. Best of all, it is presented in a language that you can understand. Are you ready for some straight talk on retirement planning without all the fluff? Well, you found the right podcast. Here's your host, certified financial planner, Greg Gonzalez.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Retirement Made Easy podcast. I'm Greg Gonzalez. Thanks for joining me today. This is part 2 of our Truths About Social Security discussion. And I'm one of those advisors that is kind of committed to being a lifelong learner. And one of the things that I subscribe to is actually a advanced Social Security planning newsletter that an industry professional puts out. It costs me about $300 a year. But for me, because this is my profession, I think that $300 a year is a great investment because it allows me to increase the value of the advice that I'm putting out there and providing not only to clients, but also those that enjoy this podcast and other sources. So this episode, it might be a little more advanced when it comes to Social Security planning than maybe folks are used to hearing. And quite frankly, there's a lot of advisors that just, I guess, have no desire to really understand and master how Social Security works and how to make better decisions based on the functionality of Social Security and what's allowed and what's not allowed. So that's what you have to look forward to on today's episode of the Retirement Made Easy podcast. If you're a new listener, I invite you to check out our website, retirementmadeeasypodcast.com, underneath the resources tab. There's some resources you can download for free. My 3 steps to a bright, successful retirement. There's a tax planning guide, all kinds of different stuff. It's emailed to you. And best of all, we don't spam you. So check that out, retirementmadeeasypodcast.com. And for those people that are interested in working with somebody that specializes in retirement planning, there's a section right there on the website, a little form to fill out. All right, let's jump into today's episode, part 2 of the Truths About Social Security. And the thing about Social Security, there's a lot of different factors that we really need to think about, and that's going to be the point of discussion today. I guess it gets a little more complicated is when you're dealing with a currently married couple, a widow or widower, or someone that is divorced but was married to one or more people, ex-spouses, for 10 years or more, versus someone that was never married or is now divorced but was only married to ex-spouses for less than 10 years. Because that person, that single person now, they only have to claim on their earnings history, not a spousal benefit or a survivor benefit. So really 2 camps of people. And for the single people, again, it's kind of a now or later decision. It's quite simple. It's, hey, do I delay the benefit? And as we know, for every month that you delay your benefit between 62 and age 70, it will be higher. Well, how much higher? Well, let's talk about that single person that says, hey, as soon as I turn 62, I want to start my benefit. And it would actually start the month after you turn 62. Versus if they delayed all the way until their 70th birthday and they got all of those deferral credits, it would actually be 76% higher. 76%. That's what we're talking about, a 76% increase between 62 and age 70. And that's assuming there's not costs of living adjustments between those 8 years. So at a minimum, we can kind of say at a surface level, hey, that's the difference. Again, 76% increase between age 62 and age 70. So let's think about the magnitude of that income. Let's say that 62-year-old lives until 92 and they start their benefit at 62. That's 30 years of collecting a Social Security check. And we can talk about this more, but a lot of people want to bring up the concept of what's the break-even age? Meaning, if I collect at age 62 versus I wait until full retirement age, at what age would have been better off waiting to start my benefit? Like, how long do I have to live here for the break-even amount to be the same? And this is an easier concept for someone that's single or divorced and was never married to anyone for 10 years or more, because they're only looking at their own earnings record. There's no spousal or survivor benefit that's going to be on the table. Because in the back of my mind, and unfortunately, I've had clients that passed away early before ever receiving a Social Security benefit check. So they paid in for all these years. And if they were single, there's no survivor benefit. Other than, keep in mind, when somebody passes away, Social Security writes a check. There's a death benefit of $255. It's a one-time check. I won't get on my soapbox, but $255 really, just think about that in today's dollars. It's kind of nice. Okay, that can go for funeral expenses and that kind of thing. But $255, give me a break. That's not going to really move the needle for anybody. And in my opinion, they should probably just do away with that. That's one of the things that Social Security has not updated over the years. And they should really get with the times. Hey, a $255 death benefit is not helping anybody. Let's be real here. And while I'm at it, the way they tax Social Security, it has changed over the years. And the way it is now, as much as 85% of your Social Security could be subject to federal income taxes. Another way of saying that is at least 15% of your Social Security tax will be tax-free. And it could be more depending on this formula that they came up with called provisional income, which is essentially half of your combined Social Security for the year plus your modified adjusted gross income. So think like pensions, dividends, all that kind of stuff. And if that's over for a married couple filing jointly, if it's over $44,000 in a year, then you're in this band where 85% of your Social Security check is taxed. And you might think, well, how did they come up with $44,000 for this provisional income? Oh, well, they came up with that amount, that $44,000, back in 1984. And they have not indexed that with inflation. That number has not increased since 1984. And when I say that to people, when I proclaim that to people, a lot of people don't believe that. And they go back and they fact check me and they're like, wow, you were right. They have not indexed this with inflation. And it's been, again, 1984. That was 40 years ago. So a lot of our clients will ask, why am I paying taxes on my Social Security benefits? And how can we strategically pay less? Well, in that calculation, keep in mind that HSA withdrawals, Roth IRA withdrawals in retirement do not cause your Social Security to become more taxable. They're not included in that provisional income calculation. So if Roth IRAs and HSAs didn't already have enough advantages, there's another one. They can really help reduce the taxes that you pay on your Social Security. So if you've heard me mention on this podcast about a tax-efficient retirement income, that's exactly what we're talking about. It's kind of the push and pull of where we take our income from in retirement. And by making one decision, it can cause your Social Security either become less taxable or more taxable. It's very common. The next topic I wanted to bring up was for those people that have or are under the rules of the GPO or WEP. So Government Pension Offset. And WEP stands for Windfall Elimination Provision. So there are teachers under the TRS, Teachers Retirement Systems, in 13 different states. Teachers do not pay into Social Security. They have work that's not covered. Now, they still pay into Medicare, and Missouri happens to be one of those states. That's where I'm based out of in St. Louis, Missouri. So I have clients that are retired teachers that are receiving a teacher's retirement pension here in Missouri, but they may not be entitled to their entire spousal benefit from their spouse who had earnings and paid into Social Security for all those years. They may not be entitled to the full spousal benefit because of these provisions. I have a couple clients, for example, that may be receiving that teacher's retirement pension. But again, these provisions greatly reduce any spousal or survivor Social Security benefit that they may be entitled to. And the same thing goes to maybe those government workers, people who work for the government, or firefighters, or anyone that was in a type of work that you're not paying in to Social Security. Again, keep in mind that these provisions are out there that can reduce your Social Security check, your spousal or survivor Social Security check. And even those years that maybe you worked in the private sector that you were paying into Social Security, well, the years that you were not a non-covered worker, they can offset. And I know believe me, I've heard it from a lot of clients that say, hey, this isn't fair. These provisions aren't fair because when I worked in the private sector, I was paying in just like everybody else was. So that should not reduce my Social Security check. But the fact of the matter is, as it stands now, you need to be aware of the government pension offset and the WEP, windfall elimination provision. So if you had any years where you were not paying into Social Security throughout your work history, you need to see how these are going to impact you. So let's go back to that example where I have that retired client that was a retired Missouri teacher for 35 years. So she's collecting her teacher's retirement pension, and her husband says, well, gosh, I want to claim my benefit as late as possible at age 70, because if something happens to me, I want this big Social Security check to be available for my surviving wife. Well, think about that. If that survivor, if something does happen to him, let's say he claims his benefit at 70, and then at 71, heaven forbid, he passes away, her Social Security survivor benefit is going to be greatly, greatly reduced because she's receiving that teacher's retirement pension. So we've got to understand if something happened to him, to the husband, how much of that Social Security check she would really receive as a survivor benefit. And if he knew, hey, she's going to get pennies on the dollar here, well, maybe he makes a decision to claim earlier. And so I'm going to stay there. I'm going to stay at that point with this whole idea of a survivor benefit. When you've got a couple, you've got one higher earning couple, just a work history. Again, Social Security is based on your best 35 working years. So you're going to have ultimately one higher earning spouse and then one lower earning spouse. And the lower earning spouse is going to have a lower Social Security benefit every month. And I've gotten this question a lot, not only from people that either find me online, listening to the podcast, referred to me, and sometimes they'll say, hey, I had a spouse that passed away. What's going to happen to their Social Security check? And it really depends on how old the surviving spouse is and their Social Security benefit and whether they have claimed their Social Security check or not. So let's just say, hypothetically, that the higher income earning spouse passes away and the surviving spouse is full retirement age. Well, what's going to happen automatically is, and this is assuming the surviving spouse has already claimed their benefit, it will essentially get stepped up to the benefit that the spouse that is now deceased was receiving. That's if the surviving spouse is at full retirement age or older. And I've talked about this on a previous podcast. What if the surviving spouse is only 58 years old? Well, the survivor benefit for Social Security doesn't kick in until age 60. So that 58-year-old surviving spouse is not going to be able to get any kind of survivor benefit for 2 years. So that's why I like to have life insurance in place until people get to age 60. And again, this is going to depend on your circumstances, but generally speaking, because Social Security doesn't kick in, the survivor benefit doesn't kick in until 60, that's what many planners like myself like to see. And years ago, we were doing a radio show in St. Louis. We had somebody that called in that was in tears. She was very, very emotional and was 58 years old and was in that predicament. No life insurance, and really, really was going to be in tough shape because that Social Security check that the now deceased husband was receiving, older husband that is, he was 65, that's the survivor benefit is not going to kick in for another 2 years. Now, even though the survivor benefit goes into play as early as age 60, it is reduced. You've got to keep in mind that it is reduced. You're not going to get that full benefit. So hypothetically speaking, let's say a 60-year-old couple, they're both 60, and the husband passes away, wife can say, no, I don't have to claim this survivor benefit at 60. I can wait until full retirement age if I want to start that benefit. Maybe she's working, doesn't need the money at that point, then she can delay that spousal benefit and it'll grow. It'll be bigger later down the road. If she's not working, she might say, I'm going to take this reduced survivor benefit, and then later on down the road, when I'm 70, I'll switch over to my own benefit, assuming that her benefit would be higher at that point. At age 70, she could then switch over to her own. I have a client that was in that situation that we decided together, hey, they were going to retire a little early, start this Social Security survivor benefit check, and then once 70 comes around, switch over to their own. That's kind of a strategy that they call the survivor step up. It is a very, very underutilized strategy because I don't think people really know about it, and they could be costing themselves literally a ton of money over the long haul. And especially when there's a death, it's easier to say, well, I'll just do this. And Social Security does not give advice. They just give facts. If you started here, this is what it'll be. And a lot of times I've had clients that have gone to Social Security in these situations, and Social Security doesn't even know that they're able to really do a spousal step up like this, a survivor step up. But let's look at the facts from Social Security. You can find this all at ssa.gov. There's also an article, which we'll have in the notes. It's by Kiplinger's Widows Move Forward on Their Own, but Not Alone by Francis, and it's 2021. So 80% of men die married. Let me say that again. 80% of men die married. 80% of women die single. And 50% of women that are widowed after age 65 will outlive their husband by 15 years. So those are the facts and figures. And a lot of people say, well, I'm going to outlive my wife. Her mom didn't live that long, and her aunt, she died early too. But you don't know, buddy. And the statistics are against you. I mean, just look at it. I can, again, say that 80% of men die married, 80% of women die single. And when my grandmother, who was my first client ever, when she was in assisted living, 95% of the people with her were women, 5% guys. That's a ballpark estimate when you kind of look around. So I think we need to take this into account. We need to kind of look at, hey, what are the statistics here? What do they tell us? And they kind of tell us, hey, that surviving spouse, most of the time is going to be a widow, is going to be the wife. And you look at the figure, Social Security says, of the widowed women 65 and older, 36.5% of them, so a little over a third, get 90% or more of their income from Social Security. So they're in poverty level. So knowing this, that's what we have to kind of say, okay, this is what the statistics tell us. How do we fix this? And a lot of times it can be that Social Security check, because that's lifetime income, and maximizing that, maybe at least one of the checks, and having a strategy for that surviving spouse, which is statistically going to be the wife, but certainly may not always be the wife. But I think it's safe to say, and more times than not, it will be. And that survivor benefit is so powerful because it's the last spouse standing is going to have that Social Security check for the rest of their life. And going into retirement, the smaller your nest egg, the bigger the deal Social Security is and lifetime Social Security income planning is. Because the money's got to come from somewhere. And if you're delaying Social Security, the money's got to come from employment income, dipping into your nest egg, or a pension. And one of the last things that I wanted to touch on was cost of living adjustments. Because this lifetime income, the Social Security check, is really an annuity. It's going to live as long as you do, and it might even be able to benefit your spouse if you're married with a survivor benefit. And while you're living, it could be a spousal benefit. They could get up to 50% of your benefit at your full retirement age. But let's think of those cost of living adjustments. Your check is indexed with inflation, not perfectly. Social Security has their own formula to coming up with the cost of living adjustment, which is announced every year in October, what it's going to be for the following year starting in January. But just think about it like this. If your full retirement age benefit is $1,000 at 67, if you start it at age 62, it's going to be only $700. And if you wait until age 70, it's going to be $1,240. Again, the difference between 62 and 70 is 76% increase. But let's say, hypothetically, just easy math, that inflation was out of control one year and it was 10%. The cost of living, you're going to get a 10% raise on your Social Security check. Well, if you started at age 62, it's $700. So 10% of that goes up $70. But the person that claims at 70, it goes up from $1,240. It goes up 10% by $124 a month. So it's the same percentage, but that $1,240 check went up $124 a month. So if you've ever seen compound interest and how much the bigger dollar amounts really go over time, that's the difference that we're talking about. And just think about that. If you're getting $3,000 a month from Social Security and you get a 10% COLA, cost of living adjustment, that's $300 extra bucks a month. And that's really the unknown, is how much that cost of living adjustment's going to be throughout your retirement. We can kind of look back and say, hey, what has it averaged the last 30 years? And we all know the last couple of years, inflation has been really high. So Social Security checks have been going up greater than the average. And some years, there's no cost of living adjustment. Like, it stays the same. And even some years it went down because, again, that Medicare Part B comes right out of your check if you're 65 and older and collecting your Social Security benefit. You will see your Medicare Part B premium, which starts at basically $175 a month. Well, that has a cost of living adjustment as well. And if you look between 2000 and 2020, I believe it went up 5.9% per year is what I found on SSA.gov. So if your inflation adjustment, your COLA, is going up, you can estimate 2 to 3% a year on average over 30 years, the Medicare Part B premium has been well ahead of that. And that's another thing that people don't understand. And that can really eat into that Social Security check, especially if you claimed it early. And that's another thing that I want people to understand, is that Medicare Part B premium is a bigger percentage of your check the earlier you claim your Social Security benefit. And the last thing that I'll mention, because a lot of people don't understand this, is if you hop on Medicare at age 65, they're going to look at your income from 2 years ago when you were 63. That income that year is going to determine, that household income, the price you pay for Medicare Part B. And if there's what they call an IRMAA tax, and if you're over a certain amount, if your income at age 63 was over a certain amount, you might have what they call increased IRMAA taxes, or just an increased premium on your Part B and D. So that planning actually starts 2 years earlier if you're above, or think you're going to be above, a certain threshold. And the last thing that I'll mention on this episode is the spousal benefit, because I get so many questions about this. The way the spousal benefit works, generally speaking, is at the time you want to claim the benefit, they look at your age and your benefit based on your best 35 working years, and that's going to be your benefit at that time. And then they look at what your spousal benefit would be. And let's just assume that you're at full retirement age, just to keep it simple. And let's say your full retirement age is age 67. They would say, okay, your benefit at full retirement age 67, we compare that to 50% of your spouse's. You get whatever's higher at that point. But the most you're ever going to get for a spousal benefit is 50% of your spouse's PIA, which is the amount at their full retirement age. And the kicker is your spouse would have had to claim, they would have started their Social Security check for you to be eligible to get that spousal benefit. In other words, if you're 67 and your spouse is 68 and still holding off and delaying their Social Security check, you can't even start the spousal benefit. You could only claim your own benefit. Now, a lot of people ask is, what if I'm 62, my spouse has already started their benefit, and let's say they're full retirement age? Well, being only 62, you're going to be reduced. You're not going to get the full 50%, half of your spouse's. You would only get 32.5% of your spouse's. And again, they would compare that to your own, and you get the higher of the two. And you might say, well, in that case, I'll just wait until I'm a little bit older where I'm going to get a bigger Social Security check. And the way it stands now, you used to be able to file and suspend or filing a restricted application where you get half of your spouse's and then you switch over to your own later on. You can't do that anymore. That's only when it comes to a survivor benefit would that come into play. I hope this episode of the Retirement Made Easy podcast has been helpful. If you have questions, visit my website, retirementmadeeasypodcast.com. I'll see you next time. And remember, always dream big. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, please consult your attorney, tax advisor, or financial advisor prior to investing. This is a hypothetical example and is not representative of any specific investment. Your results may vary. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices mentioned are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. The SmartVestor program is a directory of investment professionals. Neither Dave Ramsey nor SmartVestor are affiliates of St. Louis Retirement Advisors or LPL Financial. There is no guarantee that a diversified portfolio will enhance overall returns or outperform a non-diversified portfolio. Diversification does not protect against market risk. All investing involves risk, including loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA, SIPC. And here's another minute of disclosures from our compliance department. Traditional IRA account owners have considerations to make before performing a Roth IRA conversion. These primarily include income tax consequences on the converted amount in the year of the conversion, withdrawal limitations from the Roth IRA, and income limitations for future contributions to a Roth IRA. In addition, if you are required to take a required minimum distribution in the year you convert, you must do so before converting to a Roth IRA. As I have said on countless episodes, this information is not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized tax advice. We suggest that you discuss your specific tax issues with a qualified tax advisor.
Thank you for listening to the show today. Check us out at our website, retirementmadeeasypodcast.com. And if you want some help from Greg, submit your questions at the bottom of the page or sign up for a 30-minute retirement coaching session with Greg. We'll see you next week.